both. So friends, we have Shu as well as Courtney. Both are from Perficient. I'll allow them to introduce themselves, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank them. Two wonderful women on a session on Glassmapper. They were open to take this session when I requested it formally. So thank you for joining us, Shu and Courtney, and looking forward for your session. Thanks a lot. And by the way, this session is getting recorded shortly, and please be aware of that. This is for everyone, and I request everyone to be on mute. And if you have any questions, kindly park it to the last, just in the interest of time. Thanks a lot, guys. Shu and Courtney,
Okay.
over to you.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah.
Recording
Thank
has
you.
started.
All right. Recording has started. Thanks, Kishore, for inviting us, and very happy to be here today. Today we're gonna present to you Glassmapper 5. The first half we're gonna talk about what Glassmapper is and how to use Glassmapper, and the second half we're gonna talk about what is new and changed in Glassmapper 5. My name is Shu Jackson. I am a technical consultant at Perficient. We're located in Atlanta, US, and my co-presenter
is Courtney Dean. That's me. I'm also a technical consultant at Perficient. We've both been working on Sitecore for the past few years and have used Glassmapper in most of our projects. So that's how we came to this topic. And those are our Twitter handles if you feel so inclined to follow us. So what is Glassmapper? Glassmapper is a Sitecore ORM created by Sitecore MVP Mike Edwards. So what does ORM stand for? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. So what does that do for you? It allows you to map two different objects to each other. As you can see on this slide, there's an example of a Sitecore template and then a C# model, and those are not the same thing. But with an ORM, in this case Glassmapper, you are able to map this code to each other. Glassmapper specifically allows you to map data from Sitecore, such as this type template, to a strongly typed C# model. For example, you see single line text field. We are able to map that to string in our C# model. Without a Glassmapper or an ORM, you're going to end up writing a lot of mapping code using the Sitecore API to get the same effect. So here we have an example of mapping code with the Sitecore API. So you can see here with the Sitecore API, we're having to query the item from Sitecore, get back that result, and then go basically field by field and map that data to your model. With Glassmapper, you can see we've just got one line of code and all of that mapping is taken care of for us. So you can see that there is definitely a difference in the amount of code you're writing, which is the amount of time you would be spending. So definitely better to go for Glassmapper versus writing all this mapping code. This is another example of mapping code with the Sitecore API. This specific example also includes children items if you would need to get information from your item's children. Again, with the Sitecore API, we're having to map each field, and in this case, do a for each through the item's children. So again, just a lot more code and time here. Versus with Glassmapper, if you want to get your children's fields too, you would just include this attribute of Sitecore children, and all of that getting items from your children is taken care of for you. So again, you're going from this for each to one attribute, and you've got the same effect. So again, less code is better. So Glassmapper is not going to be a total replacement for the Sitecore API. There are still things that you can really only do through the Sitecore API. For example, if you want logic for locking or unlocking your items, that's not really something Glassmapper is going to be able to do for you. But with Glassmapper, you are able to add this attribute Sitecore item, which you see on this model here. And that just gives you all of the fields for that item. So at some point later in your code, if you do come to the point where you need to lock or unlock your item, having this Sitecore item attribute goes ahead and gives you access to that item instead of having to then, again, write some mapping code to get that item for yourself. GlassMapper goes ahead and gives you all of those attributes with that Sitecore item attribute on your model.
So, how to use GlassMapper? Well, you install GlassMapper from NuGet. This brings us the first big change in GlassMapper 5. In previous versions, GlassMapper detects your Sitecore version and install Glass accordingly. And if you aren't referencing Sitecore.kernel and Sitecore.mvc, Glass won't install properly. You will have to uninstall and reinstall. So the key change here in this new version is you install by Sitecore version you are working on. So if you are working in Sitecore 9, you would need to install glassmapper.sc.90. As you can see on the screen, for each version of GlassMapper, there are 3 packages: glassmapper.sc, .sc.mvc, .sc.core. So if you're developing in a Helix solution, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Helix, but if you are, you can download the main glass.mapper.sc package in the foundation layer of Helix, your Helix solution. Then just install core and MVC in other projects as needed in other 2 layers. We will talk more about working with Helix specifically towards the end of the presentation. But for now, just know there are 3 packages and there are different versions of GlassMapper for different versions of Sitecore that you're working with. So that's the first big change brought in this new version. So after you install GlassMapper, you get 2 generated files in your app start folder, as shown on the left on the screen. GlassMapper SC and GlassMapper SC custom. And if you are working with Helix again, they live in your foundation layer. So 2 things to keep in mind here. First, never change the non-custom file, the first file. So you should not touch that one. And if you do need to add any custom configuration, add them in the second file, GlassMapper SC custom. And that brings us the second point. So be careful what you put in the custom file, because it can be overwritten with the NuGet update. So if it changes your file, be careful to preserve whatever custom configuration that you put there. So on the right is a screenshot of the custom file. Next slide. So after you install GlassMapper, how to use it? Well, you use it if you are working with MVC, which you should be. You will have your model class, your model classes, or your interface. So basically, you want to configure GlassMapper to map your models to the Sitecore data. There are 2 ways to configure mapping in GlassMapper: attribute mapping and flowing configuration. On the left side is attribute mapping. You can see there is a Sitecore type template ID above the class name line, and Sitecore type field ID above each field. They are there to map the specific template and fields in Sitecore to your class and the properties in the class. GlassMapper can also map relationships using Sitecore children and also Sitecore item to map Sitecore item, as mentioned by Courtney in the previous slides. There is also Sitecore query to use query for mapping, and also Sitecore info, which can provide you metadata such as item URL. You do have an option of auto map to use for mapping field names when the names are the same in your Sitecore and in your code. But this is not a good practice, because if someone go and changes your field name somewhere in your code, or a field name in your Sitecore, and then your code will break. So always use field ID to map your fields instead of your using AutoMap or using your field name. Now let's talk about Fluent configuration on the right side. So for Fluent configuration, you will need to add some mapping configuration as shown in the first screenshot on the right side. Then add the configuration to the configuration factory as shown in the second picture on the right side. So that lives in the GlassMapper SC custom file that was generated when Glass was first installed that we mentioned in the previous slide. Adding this ties out the model and configuration together so GlassMapper can map correctly. Both the two ways, attribute mapping and Fluent configuration, are acceptable ways to do it. It is up to you which one you like it. There are opinions on which one is better. Some people would say attribute mapping would violate single responsibility principle because now this class is responsible for taking care of both the data structure of the model and mapping configuration. However, on the other hand, attribute mapping is simpler to use, so it's up to you. I personally usually like to use attribute mapping because it is simpler to use. Next slide. Okay. So another great feature GlassMapper provides is the HTML helpers. And they allow you to make fields editable in the Experience Editor. You're seeing some examples on the slides right now on the left side. So we have glass.editable for simple fields like text or date, time, etc. We also have render link for hyperlink, render image for images. Also, we have glass.edit frame. So edit frame is the only way to edit certain complex type fields such as multi-list fields in Experience Editor without using rendering parameters. So GlassMapper also provides that functionality, so that's good. Of course, you don't have to use these HTML helpers GlassMapper has. Just you can still use your plain old model.field name for the experience, but it wouldn't be editable for Experience Editor. One thing to keep in mind: make sure you have Sitecore ID on your model because it wouldn't work otherwise. GlassMapper needs to know the ID to find and write to the correct Sitecore item. Slide.
So what's new and changed in GlassMapper 5? Here listed are the big 5 things. We'll go through each one individually. So changes to NuGet package. Shu already touched on this, but the big change again here is that the NuGet packages now include the version number to correspond to the version of Sitecore you're using. So there's our big change number 1. The second change is that Sitecore context, GlassView, and Glass Controller are now obsolete. You're not going to need these any longer. So why? Sitecore context before was responsible for a mixture of database access and request context. It is replaced now with some new context, which you can, spoiler alert, read farther down on the slide to find out this new context. And these new contexts fit much more closely with the actual Sitecore architecture. So you're going to be using those contexts instead of Sitecore context now. And then with GlassView and Glass Controller, any value they were providing, you can get through other means, or they don't have much value at this point. So they're now marked obsolete. For example, with Glass Controller, that was providing you access to Sitecore context. Well, Sitecore context is now obsolete, so that's not a useful part of Glass Controller. And Glass Controller also allowed you to access your data source item or rendering parameters for your item. But now with the new context, that's how you'll be getting those items. So no value, Glass Controller is not really adding value at this point because you can get these items through the new context available. With Glass View, as Shu just talked about, with editable, we can get those through HTML helpers. Well, Glass View kind of expedited the way to get your HTML helper set up. So with using the HTML helper, you have to do html.glass.editable. With Glass View, you could just go editable. But the HTML helper provides that value for you to have the editable fields and other things. So Glass View is not really adding much value here. So obsolete. The key word in all of this is the word obsolete. This means it's going to be deleted at a future update. So when you do make the upgrade to Glass Mapper 5, that should be priority 1 to get rid of Sitecore Context and Glass View and Glass Controller, because otherwise the day will come when they are deleted and then code will break and it will not be fun. So keyword of obsolete, make sure these are removed once you make the change to Glass Mapper 5. D&C, we have 3 more items to go over, but we're going to cover these in different slides. So Sitecore service. First, what is Sitecore service? What does this give to you? Sitecore service basically represents individual Sitecore databases and provides the ability to perform all your basic CRUD functions against the selected Sitecore database. It's essentially a wrapper for you. And most commonly when you use Sitecore service, it would be to access items from the core database. So before with Sitecore service, when you had get item, there were a bunch of parameters because there's a bunch of different attributes or configurations you can make to get your item, whether you want to infer type or cache, or there's a bunch of options. So before that was you just had a bunch of parameters. Before get item had 30 different overrides just because of the various parameter combinations you could use for get item. 30 overrides is a lot and can get a little confusing and just a lot to handle. So now with the upgrade to Glass Mapper 5, there is this new options class added. You can see here on the screen, we have an example of get item by ID options. So we set up our options class and then we can create a config map for all the different attributes that we want to include. This includes, as you can see an example, infer type, and we have lazy loading here, but you've got cache, enforce type, version, language, etc. There's a bunch you can do. So when you create your options class, you can go ahead and set up that config map however you need. And then when you do actually call get item from Sitecore service, you just pass that options class. You've got one parameter and you're good to go. So instead of, adding all of these in the correct order to your get item call, you just pass the one options class through. Again, you can already see how that's probably much simpler than having a long parameter list. And it'll also help for backward compatibility because, again, you've just got your one parameter instead of, oh, no, there was one adjustment to the parameters and now I've got to rearrange. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You just pass your options class through and you're good to go. Also to note that old way of having the multiple parameters, that's also being marked obsolete. So again, that's going to be something you're going to want to change and make sure you move to this options class when you do make the upgrade to Glass Mapper 5. And just for the different types of options class, again, here you can see that we have a get item by ID options class. You also got get item by item, get item by path, get item by query. So there's a bunch of different options for you to get your item and set up this options class. Are you on mute?
Oh, sorry, I have talking on mute.
There you go.
Okay, let's talk about the 3 contexts that GlassMapper is offering us. The first one is MVC context. This is probably the one you will be working with the most. You use MVC context when you are using MVC. So this context provides us data source item, page context item, rendering parameters. It's super straightforward to use, and we will show you an example in the demo session. Under the hood, it is calling Sitecore service to talk to Sitecore. Again, this is mainly used for controller renderings when you are working with MVC. Next slide. The second context is request context. You use request context when you are outside of the controller and you do not have a data source item available. Common scenarios to use request context include computed fields, pipeline processors, event handlers. You can get the context item, home item, and the root item from this context. Usually you used to have to get these properties and methods from Glass controller and not be able to use it anywhere else in the old version of GlassMapper. But now with iRequest context, you can simply inject the service to wherever you need it. However, I was advised by a colleague to never inject this service to a pipeline processor, as Sitecore has a bug and will break your code. So instead, use service locator. And we will show you an example of that in the demo as well. Again, in the hood, we're calling Sitecore service to talk to Sitecore. The last context is, next slide, okay, web form context. And you should not use this one because you should not use web form. So we're not really going to talk about this one.
So the last big change we're going to talk about is to lazy loading. So before with lazy loading, that was an attribute you added to your model when you were setting up your configurations for your model, both with attribute mapping or fluent configuration. So it was kind of a situation where you had to make the decision once, do I want lazy loading here or do I not? And you had to stick with that decision. You couldn't, you had to set it down in your model and then you were done. That was what it was going to be. So now with lazy loading, instead of setting that as an attribute on your model and on your fields on your model, this is actually going to be a configuration you add when you call the item, call an item. So here you can see we have 2 examples. One is calling an item with Sitecore service, and the other one is using MVC context to get the data source item. And you can see here that we are disabling lazy loading on both these calls. So you just have a lot more flexibility here. So just when you call the item, you're like, in this situation, do I need lazy loading or do I not? And you can make that decision there. And so you just have a lot more flexibility with how you handle lazy loading instead of a kind of one and done situation, and you can't have it both ways. Now you can just, when you decide, okay, here I need it, here I don't, and make that decision at call time. Okay, so now we're going to move over to a demo. Okay. Make
Cool.
the,
So, yeah.
go ahead, just making the text a little bigger.
Yep, thank you. What you're seeing right now is our DI, so you can see how we are registering our services through dependency injection. We are registering them to this container as scoped. So all contexts all 3 that we are seeing right now are using the same instance of Sitecore service, and they don't have to create new ones within the same request. The first line Sitecore service, you can see it is created using the context database. So that's usually your master database or web database. And if you do need to access in your code somewhere the core database, then you can create there a new Sitecore service for the core database.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to kind of walk through an instance as setting up a model and calling that with the MVC context. So a lot of these you're going to look familiar because they are the screenshots from our presentation, but just to kind of walk through it in a cohesive step. So here we have our demo article. So again, here you can see we're using attribute mapping, template ID, and mapping by the field ID with instead of auto map. And you can see here again we're using Sitecore item. So again, this is just an attribute mapping. Again, that's, as she said, this is what we prefer to use. So you can just see how we're mapping each item to our template in Sitecore. Moving over to our controller, because of the dependency injection we set up, you can see that we're just passing MVC context through our constructor, and then we're ready to go and we can use it. And again, all we're doing is we're saying MVC context, get our data source item. We're going to map it to that demo article model. Done. Mapping done. Again, much, much simpler than actually writing that mapping code. And again, to continue through this process, here is our view. You can see how we have set up all the editable. We have all of our text editable, the dates editable, and using render image and setting is editable to true so we can edit all this stuff. So again, you've seen this in the slides, but just so you can see one by one how you would set this up. And then to prove that this works, let's go over into our experience editor. Let's see if Sitecore has not logged me out, and it has. So let's log back in. Stand by. Okay, so this is our article demo page, so I'm just going to take us over to the experience editor. And as it loads, you'll see that our view comes up. So we had our header, body, image, and date. That was the editable fields. And so you can see here, these are all editable. I'm going to take out some of these exclamation points. That's a lot. I'm going to update the dates today. So let's get that date updated. Yeah, today is the 26th. Okay. Yep. Save. Done. I mean, this is great because then our content editors don't even have to be in the content tree. Just right here on your experience editor, they can see what the change will look like, and we're ready to go. So you can see here just all of the nice things that we can do with GlassMapper and making things editable in Experience Editor. The second context we talked about was request context. So again, as Shu mentioned, we've not recommended to use dependency injection in a pipeline processor. Here we're creating a not found processor. So, if a user goes to a bad URL, we can handle that situation for them instead of them just getting an ugly error page. So in this pipeline processor, we're using our service locator to get request context set up versus dependency injection, as we did with MVC context. So for our pipeline processor example here, we're just getting the home item and returning that. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be a use case in a real world context. Just because the user gets URL, you don't want to necessarily send it to the home page. But for our example here, that's what we're going to do. And so to show you that this request context does actually work, I'm going to open up our site here, and I'm going to go to a really bad URL. Like, that's definitely not one. And you can see here we've got our out-of-the-box homepage, so you can see that it did return the homepage correctly to us. So that's kind of a context of when you would use request context instead of MVC context. We do not have a demo for web forms because we only do MVC. So I think that's it on the demo, so let me bring back up the slides. Okay. All right, and moving on from the demo.
Now we'd like to introduce to you a newest feature brought in GlassMapper version 5.1 on October 10th. As mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, if you are working with a Helix solution, GlassMapper.sc should be only installed in the foundation layer and in a ORM project ORM module in your foundation layer. What that means is those two generated files when installing that you get when installing the NuGet package should live in the App Store folder in this module, in this ORM module only. Now you are seeing the structure of how Glass works with Helix. It is important that glassmapper.sc NuGet package is only referenced by a single module in your foundation layer. Then in the feature and project layer projects, glassmapper.sc.core will always be installed. Install glassmapper.sc.mbc only when needed. That means if you're working with MVC and need access to MVC context, then install glassmapper.sc.mbc in that module. Next slide. As mentioned before, any custom configuration you need to add needs to be added to glassmapper.sc custom.cs file. That's how we've been doing it before this new update. And that custom file, again, lives in your foundation layer. Doing this will bring to the solution backward dependency from project layer to the feature layer, which violates the Helix principles. Because in Helix, foundation modules can only reference other foundation modules. They may not reference feature modules or project modules. So in this new update in version 5.1, there is a new way to load configurations. Instead of adding the configuration to the custom file in the foundation layer, it can be added now using a new Sitecore pipeline introduced in GlassMapper 5.1. To do this, create a processor that inherits getGlassLoader processor. You can see in the screenshot. And this lives in your feature module that you are working with, and you need custom Glass configuration at. The configurations will be added to this processor, and then add this processor to the glassmapper.getGlassLoader pipeline. Then the foundation module code does not need to reference your feature layer. So, and also you don't need to edit glassmapper.sc custom file. That also means when you upgrade your Glass NuGet package, your custom file will not get overwritten and you will not lose those changes. So, one stone, two birds. That's the newest feature that's introduced October 10th, GlassMapper v 5.1. Next slide. So a recap here. What you're seeing is a list of the major changes in GlassMapper 5. And if you want to read more, we provide two useful links. You can find a lot of good readings there. That is the end of our presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Shu. Thank you, Courtney. Let's open up the floor for any questions, guys.
Yes, Kishore, from my side. So we had a HTML class utility, right? So if you want any customized field, then we can customize, right?
Are you talking about the HTML helper?
Yeah, yes, HTML class helper from GlassMapper.
Yes. So what is your question?
So can we customize it on our own if you need any other fields?
Yes, sure, we can customize that. And we can define that own data type on that.
And also, like our ordinary ORM entity framework, so we have multiple mappings, right? So we have many to one, one to many. So those kind of all these attributes available in GlassMapper as well, correct? So like how we are having Sitecore children for one to many.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you can handle Sitecore children and that kind of thing or like lists. You can handle that with mapping in GlassMapper, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Lisa, does that answer your question?
Sure.
All right. Any further questions from anyone?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, we just overheard someone say hello.
Hey, so I have a one question for the shoe. Uh, they have explained there are two ways to map or to render the fields from the site code. One is a article map, like kind of a field mapping, and another one is a fluent mapping. So, is there any way where we do not need to write the code, or we can auto-generate the classes for all the field that we have into the site code template?
Are you talking about auto mapping so you don't have to add this configuration?
No. Yeah. My question is we do not need to auto map all the fields. We do not need to annotate all the field IDs. Is there any way we can auto generate these class that we have a demo article that will auto sync or auto map all the fields that we have into the site code?
Not that I know of. Do you know, Courtney? I don't think.
No, I
haven't.
think, yeah, I think you need to have some kind of notation for all your fields. So GlassMapper does know what you're referencing in in Sitecore, what you're referencing there. I mean, the closest would be AutoMap, using AutoMap, but so then you didn't have to like annotate each field. But again, we don't recommend that, just because if somebody changes the field name in the code or the field name in your template, that could cause enough of an issue that GlassMapper can't then automap for you. So no, you do need to make an annotation with one of these type of mappings. So GlassMapper does know.
Okay, got it. So every time, whenever you create a template or a field into the site code, then you have to write the code manually into the Visual
Yes.
Studio, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Since we are using field ID as a reference, so in order to GlassMapper to know, we add this field ID and automation.
Other questions, friends?
Hi. In Sitecore, suppose we created any field. In that field name, we added any space. For example, first name. Here we add as first space and name. While we convert into that GlassMapper, it will automatically add a underscore. What is the best practice to add that field name in Sitecore?
Yeah, so you can have the space or not in Sitecore. Either way works. But if you do have the space, Sitecore is not going to automatically understand this property corresponds to that field name. But that doesn't matter because we recommend you to use field ID to map anyway. So you can have space if you want. You don't have to have the space. But we will always use field ID for the mapping. So as long as you keep, the good practice is keep everything consistent within your Sitecore. So if you have one field ID, one field name that has space, you should keep it consistent and always have space in other field IDs, field names. But you can choose either way, space or not, and always stick to using field ID for mapping.
Okay, thank you.
Just to expand upon that a little bit, just with differences in naming. I mean, so for example, in Sitecore, like if your content editors, you want to say like author picture, or author profile picture or something, but in your code, you're like, I just know this is an image and I don't need to have all of that extra date. Like I don't need to write out profile picture, author profile picture. I just want to write image. By using field ID, you can since you're using ID, the names don't have to be exact. So again, like as you're saying, you don't have the space doesn't matter because you're using the field ID, and I mean they don't even have to be exactly named the same because you're using field ID.
Thank you.
Right, and if you do have the space in Sitecore, your code is not gonna understand that. You would have to use field ID in those circumstances if you do have the space.
Yep.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice.
All right, I guess no further questions. So, Courtney and Shu, thanks once again for giving us a walkthrough on this GlassMapper 5.0. Hoping that this session would kind of enable the other folks who are relatively new to Sitemapper, as well as folks who are already using Sitemapper, to probably upgrade themselves and give it a try. So I guess both of them are available on LinkedIn, and
Yep.
if you have any further questions, feel free to reach them, follow them, because they're the most active people, one of the most active peoples in Sitecore community.